Little Bird watercolor painting tutorial with gouache background. For this painting practice I'm using watercolor paper from my sketchbook, which is 300 GSM hot pressed cotton paper. Applying tape around composition to form a neat frame, as I will be applying gouache paints towards the finishing part. After removing this tape, I will have a neat and crisp edge around my composition. With an elastic eraser, removing excess amount of graphite off the paper and some extra graphite lines that are especially visible around the body where we have this yellow orangey part. And let's mix watercolors. Applying water to color palette, starting with lemon yellow separately. Next one is Indian yellow together with a little touch of Sennelier red on the corner. Third, Indian yellow and Perlin maroon. A little touch of Sennelier red. And fourth mix is ultramarine blue, little touch of Sennelier red, and lemon yellow. This is for the gray part where we have head and tail. The same pigments but with slightly different ratio, applying to have a more cooler gray color and painting out pigments that I pre-mixed. Let's start painting. We will start with the body part of this robin bird, and I'm starting with water layer with round synthetic brush. The approach of painting this bird will be the same as I am painting flowers. I am not at the beginning looking at this robin as a bird. I'm just looking at it as a subject, as a form. And his body, that beautiful, vibrant, yellowish, orangey body, is round subject. So I'm thinking how to form it round and with volume and looking realistic. I'm not concerned about is it a bird, is it a flower, is it a leaf. It doesn't matter. I'm looking at a form. Of course, there are some differences. For example, the bottom part, we see in the reference that there are legs, and it's not completely all roundish and smooth all around. There are some anatomical features of the bird to take into consideration. And if you open the reference right beside the tutorial or another gadget or on the screen right beside the tutorial and zoom in closer, you will notice that at the bottom part there are some lighter, darker parts. And I'm applying these watercolor mixes that we have on a palette, which is lemon yellow with the lightest part, then gradually going to the darkest, which is Indian yellow with Perlin maroon. Carefully pushing and smoothing with round synthetic brush while the surface is still wet. I can tell now after painting that this first layer I applied a little bit too much water and was dealing with paint going into some directions that I didn't want it to go, but I wasn't too worried about that because I knew that this body, this yellow orangey part, needs a lot more layers, and I can cover some minor mistakes that appeared after first layer. With darker subjects, more vibrant subjects, at the very first layers I feel more freer and more confident because I know that minor things can be changed during the painting process. With very light subjects, flowers, it is a little bit different. You need to be really careful from the first brush stroke. So it's always good to go much lighter, even with saturated and dark subjects, because there is room for improvement. There is room for maybe covering some minor mistakes. While the surface is still wet, I'm applying more darker areas. What I see in the reference are the parts of the bird where there are underneath all that fluffy body, there are legs and some anatomical features. They can be seen in the reference if you really concentrate on that area and observe it carefully. Bird is not just a round ball, it has legs, body, wings, head. Applying first layer to the head, and we see in the reference there are so many feathers, little lines, but we need to look beyond those feathers, beyond those lines. What is the background for all that? There are gray color, and I see brown color, also some blue areas, and now I'm applying base color, on which I will be applying later with a finer tip brush those little brush strokes. But for now I need to paint the base color. The same is with the body. I see in the reference there are a lot of feathers, but I'm not now thinking about feathers. Those are details. I'm thinking which color is beyond all those beautiful details of this bird. Also leaving white spots that are on the wing area and on the forehead of the bird, I'm leaving unpainted. I'm not covering also with masking fluid, just leaving area unpainted. That area is quite big and you can avoid with the brush not going into those areas. Not a problem, just carefully, don't rush, don't put water on those white spots. Applying first mix of ultramarine blue, lemon yellow and cenalia red. On the upper part of the head, we see in the reference that there are some brownish colors. The same color I'm applying on the lower part. Where's the tail part? It's in the shadow. We see and understand that the tail is white, but it is in the shadow and it appears brown. If we compare to the rock on which is standing the bird, we definitely see that the tail part is quite dark. Now the surface is completely dry and I can move forward, apply more Indian yellow and Perlin maroon. Bird will be painted also with layers. After each layer, I'm waiting a little bit for the area to be dry to apply next layer. It also depends on the paper type you are painting. Now I'm painting on 300 GSM and it doesn't receive so much watercolors and water as, for example, my paper on which I'm painting is 640 GSM. That paper can absorb much more and receive in one go much greater amount of watercolors and water. If the paper is lighter, it can receive smaller amount. So it just means that you apply one layer, then you wait for the layer to get dry, for paper to absorb and dry. So I call it also leave paper to rest. When you do that, it can rest, and after it is completely dry, it can receive another layer of watercolors, another layer of water. If you rush things and apply water layer, paints again and again, then in one point paper will start to get damaged and the painting will look quite a messy thing. Here I'm adding to my color palette lamp black for the eye, head parts, feathers, legs, mixing together with Indian yellow and little touch of ultramarine blue, so that it's not clean black for some feather parts, but also clear lamp black. And with the finer tip brush, I want to paint eye, because I know when I will put eye with that little white spot, it instantly will look much lifelike. This is the magic trick of light and white. These white spots, they help things come to life. So it's important in watercolor painting, leave light wider than it appears in the reference, so you have it till the end. Carefully painting with the finer tip brush, with the very tip of the brush, there is this very thin line around the eyeball. Zoom in closer reference, and you will notice these little details. Starting with feathers. Feathers are a lot of little brush strokes in the directions that we see in the reference. Feathers are formed in a particular way, and there are some areas where they go down, where they go around, for example, around the eye on the front side. Then there are when they go sideways. You need to look at the reference and see the direction of the feathers. Not just apply tiny brush strokes and that's it, but you need to look for how those feathers are formed on the body of the bird. The same goes when you are painting leaves or petals. There are some direction of petal veins. We are not just painting lines, we are looking where those lines are going, how they are formed. The same here with the feathers. Painting technique is little tiny brush strokes as thin as possible, because we see in the reference that those so thin, so little those feathers, and I'm achieving that with the very tip of the brush, small brush strokes, but I follow the reference. I'm zoom in closer the area that I'm painting, and I'm looking how those feathers are formed, where are they going, the direction of the growth, and I'm doing the same with my brush. Now to the legs. With legs, everything here is quite simple. One thing that you should really look for is paint them as thin as possible. We see in the reference that this robin has very tiny legs. They are a little bit thicker at the upper part and becoming even thinner on the lower part. We can't paint those legs thick. This will really ruin the painting, this composition. Better to have thinner in this case, the same as with the stems, rather than have thick legs, because this bird is so tiny and those legs and little claws, fingers are also so fragile. We need to show that fragileness in our approach of how we paint, how we show this characteristics of this bird. For the fingers of the bird, I'm applying uneven brush strokes, and claws are leaving little light area. We see in the reference that there is shiny part on the claws of the fingers, and part of the fingers is little brush strokes, tiny brush strokes, and leaving space in between, like making this appearance of some white spots that we see in the reference. Carefully with the very tip of the brush. This is the very tiny and sharp area in the composition, and we want to leave it that way. We don't want to have thick legs and thick claws. Adding more Indian yellow to my color palette. As usual, don't be afraid to run out of watercolor mixes. We can always premix more if we know the pigments that we were using. It's not a problem if the color tone will slightly differ. No problem. Your painting will only benefit. It's not like you are taking completely different pigments. You are taking the same pigments, maybe ratio is a little bit different, but you will get very similar color tone. And if it slightly will change, no problem. Look at the subject. There are different areas where different color tones of the same pigments. And now with the fine brush strokes, I'm applying Indian yellow and a little touch of Sennelier red, also as tiny brush strokes for those feathers. And if you take a closer look, you will notice that it's not completely smooth. If we look from the distance on this robin, we will see that his body, this yellowish part, is very smooth and roundish. But as we look closer, we search for details, we search for different tonal values, we start to notice that there are different directions of feathers. There are some areas that are darker, then again there's some area lighter. You need to look for these details in order for the bird to look more realistic and more lifelike. Not as a more illustrative form, but more to a realistic. And as we talked in previous months about tonal values, here is the same. We're not thinking about, oh, I'm painting a bird, how to show a bird. No, we're thinking about form, how to make this form look realistic. Where are tonal values? There are different tonal values. In order to make something realistic, it's not enough to just put light and shadow. We need to have those midtones, more midtones than the shadow. And after we have all these transitions, we can put more darkness into shadow and make it more contrasty. Lots of tiny brush strokes. As I approach lighter part, my watercolor mix is also, I'm taking a lighter part, going till the lemon yellow. And as I go lower to the darker area, I pick up Indian yellow and Perlin maroon. For the halftones, Indian yellow and Sennelier red, or only Indian yellow. If you have pigment like New Gamboge, it's also a nice vibrant yellow pigment. It will look here very good. It will be a nice addition. This New Gamboge is even more brighter yellow pigment, but Indian yellow and lemon yellow is also doing perfectly, or it can be cadmium yellow. Many layers to achieve this roundness and fluffiness of Robin's body. We need to have a lot of layers of these fine brush strokes. It's not a matter of one layer, 2 layers. There's a lot of tiny brush strokes. My limit in this tutorial is time, but I can go on and it will only make this body part even richer if more fine brush strokes will be added. If you are not pushing too hard with saturated watercolor mix, you can go on and on. Better to paint lighter and build more layers. If you will paint darker, more saturated, after a few layers you are done and the painting looks flat, maybe even sometimes muddy, because watercolors are not supposed to be painted with too saturated watercolor mixes. And as you can see, I'm leaving little lighter areas. Those are the areas where the legs are. They appear also in the reference a little bit lighter. We need to have this anatomical feature of the bird. So maybe if it would be completely sitting like in a nest, completely sitting, then those legs wouldn't be visible. But at this point the bird is standing and we need to show this little thing that there are legs. Outer edge line for this bird, no need to make it crisp and even. Even little brush strokes, little feathers can go out of the edge line. Adding tiny gray feathers. I see in the reference that there's a little bit visible part, I guess from the wing part. So little tiny brush strokes, just a little bit and very light. I'm adding, and when I will be applying background, I will try to remember that there are feathers and not to overpaint them. Then this lower part of the body, also adding gray watercolor mix with fine brush strokes. And as you can see, the amount of watercolors that I'm using is very small. On the palette you see that there's not too saturated watercolor mixes, and I'm building saturation gradually. I need to have a complete picture to understand where I can push more with more saturated and more darker watercolor mixes. Applying on the inner part of the tail and avoiding those little hairs on the bottom part. working with the tip of the brush. We can do anything with the tip of the brush. No need to use white paint or masking fluid. Everything can be done with the brush if you don't rush, if you paint carefully and gradually. Adding more Indian yellow to my color palette. A little amount of water. And with round synthetic brush, I'm applying transparent layer of watercolors, which is Indian yellow, maybe a little touch of Sennelier. Slightly smoothing layer underneath those fine brush strokes, but not completely. And giving extra layer, transparent layer. Moving forward with feathers, using lamb black and a mix of lamb black, ultramarine blue and Indian yellow. And building layers here as well, gradually with tiny brush strokes. with round synthetic brush, picking up transparent amount of watercolor mixes and glazing this very transparent layer over fine brush strokes, slightly smoothing them, giving extra layer, extra tone. Careful here with water amount, better to have lesser amount of water, and also saturation of watercolor mixes. More darkness to eye. As I apply more watercolors around, this eye starts to look lighter, and that is normal. That is better to have it lighter rather than don't know how to make it lighter. We can always go darker. The problem is with watercolors to go lighter. Gradually building darkness of the feathers. I see that compared to the reference, my bird is still quite light. The upper part is quite light, so I need to build more layers of fine brush strokes, but I'm slowly getting there. No need to rush. If you feel the urge to rush, better to take a break and come back again, energized and ready to paint carefully and slowly. more darkness to the tail area. Again, carefully with layers, I'm slowly getting there. Now back to the body, and now I will be applying tiny brush strokes in different directions that I see in the reference. I noticed that there are some areas where feathers are going more sideways, some are going straight down. Careful observation of the reference, just the same as with flowers. I haven't painted birds before. This is my first time with watercolors, and at the first I was like, how to paint it, how to approach this, and I realized that the approach technique is the same. It's not about the subject, it's about what you see and which form first you notice. Technique is the same as I would paint, I don't know, tulip petals or tulip head, leaves. I go with the same technique, it's just slightly different picture at the end. Now I'm happy with the bird and I want to paint background. And I like the reference, the dark, deep green color. So I'm taking my gouache paints using indigo, cadmium yellow and cadmium lemon. I'm taking bigger brush, synthetic flat brush, and with different direction movements applying background. You can paint background, you can avoid and leave just the bird. It's your choice. You can paint different background. I just like how it looks all together. Careful around the bird when you will be applying background, if you will. Otherwise, it's your choice how you want to make it more gradual, more with spots. You can add some other colors. I'm also adding a little touch of red to make it more earthy green. And with gouache paints, you can go saturated. That is the difference with watercolors. Gouache is more similar to oils and acrylics. It's only you can dilute it with water, but the more saturated you are going, the more vibrant you will have the result. And watercolor gouache mixes, but also as you add something light, it will become light. It's not that how it works with watercolors. If you add lighter pigment, you just mix watercolors and get some different color. But here I'm adding cadmium lemon and it instantly is making lighter even the darkest green area. Adding more gouache. It's even better to mix greater amount. So you at the beginning have a quite big amount of mix so you can go and freely paint. Especially for the background, as it is a much wider area, and use slightly bigger brush. Better to use here flat brush. Background is done, and now to the rock, adding already to my yellow mixes Sennelier red and sap green, and I have brown color. I will not go too much into detailing to painting this rock. More major pieces that I see in a reference, some darker, some lighter area, and that's it. My main character here is bird, and background beautifully complements the bird. It really makes it more brighter, more vivid. I really like how that background is together with this bird. Now that the bird is painted, background is in place, and rock is also in place, I can compare my painting to the reference. And as everything is almost finished, I see that some area needs a little bit more darkness, as this, for example, tail part, compared to the rock in the reference, tail is much darker. So I'm adding another layer of watercolors. Carefully, don't overwork here. Slightly we are making darker, something darker gradually. Also, this little thing on the bottom part is also too light in my painting. I need to make it slightly darker. Very light amount of lamb black. And head part needs darkness as well. Reference is much darker. Now's the time that we can go darker, we can add darkness. It would be hard if we would apply background and notice that our bird is too dark and lost its light and vibrancy. So better to have it much lighter, and we can add watercolors more. I noticed that eye of the bird in my painting became slightly smaller compared to the reference, so I try with the very tip of the brush make it a little bit wider on the left side of the eye, but really careful not to overwork, because we can quickly go from small eye to huge. So with little tiny brush strokes, adjusting some what I can adjust. Extra feathers, a little bit more darkness. Also, lower part of the body needs a little bit more darkness. With round synthetic brush, applying more mix of Indian yellow, perlin maroon, and little touch of Sennelier red. It can be cadmium red, it's your choice. Windsor red. applying finishing brush strokes to this beautiful bird. And this is my first bird with watercolors, and I'm really happy with the result. I was skeptical but I liked it. I really liked the process of painting bird and how it comes to life. Something interesting in seeing a really lifelike subject with eyes and legs, not just flowers, petals and leaves. Hope you also enjoyed this tutorial and maybe learned something new if you never tried birds. If you already tried, I would like to hear your comments. How is my approach to painting birds? And thank you for watching. See you in my next tutorials. Bye bye.